and welcome to Security Analysis. I am Uday Bhaskar. The focus for our discussion this week is India-US maritime cooperation. The context has been provided by the ongoing Malabar multilateral maritime exercises currently in the Bay of Bengal, as also the visit of the U.S. Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Gilday. What is the background to India-US naval cooperation? What does it mean for India's overall security and strategic interests? And what is the way ahead in the light of the Quad, as also the most recently announced AUKUS, that is Australia, UK, and US, naval/maritime cooperation. To walk us through this, I have great pleasure in introducing and welcoming Admiral Arun Prakash, former Chief of the Naval Staff, Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Arun sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is to help us understand the framework in which India and the United States are engaged in naval cooperation. Malabar is going on, but Malabar has a fairly, I would say, long genealogy. It goes back to the early 90s, if I remember right. Perhaps you were in command then, I can't remember, but definitely it was the mid-90s or so. So from there to now, how do you see Malabar as a symbol of the India-US naval cooperation? Arun sir, over to you.
Thank you, Uday. Well, as you pointed out, Malabar goes back to 1992. And the significance of Malabar was that it was the USA which reached out to India. And India had been in a cocoon for the duration of the Cold War. And at this time, the USA reached out and asked the three services to participate in bilateral exercises. I think you were involved in some way with the Kick-Lighter proposals.
Yeah.
So the Navy was the pick off the mark and the first service to take on this. So Malabar started in 1992 and now it is into its 29th year. As bilateral exercises go, it's been built up over the years, gained in complexity and interoperability, etc. But the point arises that where do you go after this? I mean, there is so much you can do in bilateral exercises, establish understanding with each other, interoperability, but interoperability to what purpose? Perhaps disaster relief and so on. So I think this is a time to sit back and review the whole situation as to where is Malabar going. Yes, what has changed is that Malabar has now been expanded to include two more countries. From a bilateral, it's become a quadrilateral. And remarkably that the membership of the Quad and the Malabar is exactly the same four countries. But so what? So I think we need to stand back at this juncture and see where does Malabar, Quad, where do they fit into India's larger matrix of international relations, into India's picture of national security, and then go forward, because exercises can go on forever. Every year we have Malabar, CNO, the US CNO is here. But there again, CNOs come, our chief goes to USA every 2 years, their CNO comes here, they exchange greetings and attitudes, I mean, without being rude. It's become so routine, but the question is, where do we go from here? I think that's what we need to ask.
Sir, now that you mention, the Malabar going back to 1992 and the Kick-Lighter proposals, I wanted to share something that you know, but I'm recalling it for the benefit of our audience. That many years ago, I would say around 1999, 2000, at the turn of the century, when Mr. George Fernandez was our defense minister, we had the visit of a US CNC from the Pacific Command, SINCPAC. I think it was Admiral Dennis Blair, if I remember right. And this question came up then, saying that even as the United States was looking at the Indian Ocean, it had not yet become the Indo-Pacific, it was the Asia-Pacific. But the question really was that after India's nuclear tests and the Kargil War of 1999, the question that I remember we asked him in an interaction which was off the record was that how does the United States perceive the Indian Navy? Because the background was political, that we were estranged democracies for more than 30 years. We were just beginning to engage, and the nuclear accord had not yet happened. And I remember, I'm paraphrasing this may not be an accurate quote, but the response from Hawaii was that we are the Pacific Command, and we have a division of responsibility in only one part of the Indian Ocean. This is the United States. And that we know how to engage with our allies. We know what to do with our adversaries, but we are not very sure about how do we deal with India. So this was the gist of 2000. Has that changed? Meaning that we are now a partner with the United States in a variety of ways, but have they been able to evolve a template, when we talk about military engagement, which goes a little beyond the bilateral, which is HADR and deck landings and, the usual kind of professional compulsions. Has that been resolved? I mean, you've been chairman of the Chiefs of Staff. So this is really a politico-military issue. What is your assessment?
I think that both sides are still groping to find how to establish a relationship with each other. As you said, the Americans know how to deal with allies. They've had it for many years. But we imagine ourselves to be not allies. We have friends, partners, and so on. So I don't think the Americans have yet evolved a methodology of how to deal with partners. What exactly? Also, I think our diplomats haven't yet made up their minds as to where we should put our cards. We are still persisting with fence sitting. So I think it's time to now count our chips and see where do we stand as far as our national security is concerned. What have we got to offer USA? What has USA got to offer us? After all, nations look for national interest. I mean, the national interest is supreme. So with this relationship now having progress, it's quite warm. And as I said, exchange of platitudes can only go so far. I remember as far back as 2005 or 6, Condoleezza Rice came to Delhi and she said, we will help to make India a great power. But no country becomes a great power with the help of anybody else, and so on. So platitudes have been exchanged, but on the ground, really very little has moved forward other than these Malabar exercises, etc. So I think it is time for us to take a good hard look at where we stand. And at this moment, the dragon in the room is China. China is posing a threat to USA as well as to India, but in different ways. America is remote. Their interests are more economic and trade related. We are a neighbor of China. We have territorial issues with China. Then China has formed a nexus with Pakistan. So we are wedged between two adversaries. So we have to seek a way out as to, can we handle this situation on our own? Do we need help? If we need help, then what have we got to offer? So in short, I think for far too long, we've been banking on Indian exceptionalism, that the world or the USA owes something to us, that we need not do very much, but people will still come to our help. Like it happened in 1962. We were certainly not an ally of USA, but when the Chinese invaded India, we asked for help. And I think the USA came to our assistance in a very generous manner. But this will not go on forever. So I think it's a time to take a good hard look, take a realist viewpoint and see what do we want, what have we got to offer, and what has USA got to offer us.
So your number of issues that you have touched upon, which are all, I think, very, very important. And since we are in the run-up to October 20th, in the course of the next few days, which is a recall of 1962 and India's humiliation at the hands of the PLA, China, in that particular year, 1962, October 20th. And we are now in a live situation post-Galwan with China. We are also aware that the last round of talks at the level of the military commanders did not result in any kind of accommodation of the interests on both sides. And it was a very brittle kind of, I would say, statement that was issued both by the Foreign Ministry in Delhi as also by the Foreign Office in Beijing. So against this backdrop, you are Admiral Arun Prakash, Chief of Naval Staff. You are acknowledged as a thinker and someone who's been advising the government at the highest levels. India has a direct security threat on the border. It's been going on since 1962, off and on. It is simmering now. What can the maritime domain do in any way, if at all, to improve India's security matrix framework? Is there any kind of path ahead that we should be looking at, or are we in a way, doomed to live with the two front on the land and not be able to make any difference in any other domain or sector? Arun sir?
I've been saying that it's ironic that the country's focus should come on the maritime domain because of something which is happening in the high Himalayas. It's ironic, but still it's welcome for a naval person. But let's go back a little and see how far we've come from 1962. At that point of time, it said that India or Nehru failed to understand China's motivation for what it did. 70 years down the line, both our statesmen and our diplomats have failed to achieve a basic requirement after a conflict, which is to decide mutually agreed upon boundary. We failed to establish a boundary with a huge neighbor, so that's a huge failing. And 70 years down the line, do we still know why China is doing what it is? After all, this business of salami slicing, 1,000 meters here, 2,000 meters there, is that what China wants? Or is there a bigger message that China is sending to us? That, look, I can do whatever I want and there's very little you can do about it. The prime ministers had 18 meetings with their head of state. The corps commanders have had 13 meetings. Nothing has changed. They have not budged. So I think we need to do a little bit of reading of tea leaves or analyzing of what China's motivations are. What do they actually want in this whole scenario? Now, coming to the maritime domain, yes, it's obvious that we've done whatever we could on the land. We mobilized 60 to 70,000 troops to match, to mirror Chinese deployments. And by the way, a few years ago, we were planning to raise a mountain strike corps. And that strength would have been the same, 60 to 70,000 troops. At that point of time, we said we don't have the money for it. So the mountain corps went away. But now, willy-nilly, whether we want it or not, we've deployed 60 to 70,000 troops in extreme winter conditions. All right. So we've done whatever we could, short of actually going to war. So where else do we have an advantage? And it's obvious if we look seawards, there are vulnerabilities that China has, its energy, its trade, commerce, and we have some strengths at sea. We are geographically very well placed. Our Navy is a fairly competent force, and we can threaten China. But again, we can't do it on our own. We will need help, we will need support, we'll need cooperation from other nations. And that work remains to be done. That's homework that we haven't yet done.
So I, want to extend this further, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, if you allow me, which is that you have identified the politician as being totally responsible for India's national security as part of the democratic arrangement. We have elected representatives, we have the prime minister, we have the cabinet, and they go through the electoral cycle. Then we have the bureaucracy, of which the diplomats are one part. Now, clearly from 1962 to where we are now, this combined, and I want to add the military to this, have not been able to come up or evolve any kind of effective response, which is why we are where we are. But I put it to you as a former chief of the Navy, as also a chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, the politician has a very short, I would say, shelf life, 5 years, because of the electoral cycle. And we are also a country which had 4 changes of defense minister in the first term of Prime Minister Modi. We have diplomats whose primary skill is diplomacy. They are supposed to negotiate and give the country the benefit of whatever be the deal that can be extracted from the foreign interlocutor. They are not people who are aware of strategy and the fine points of military capabilities. It is the military as an institution. Do you think that they have proved to be inadequate over the last few decades in not being able to go to the politician and say that this is how we think you should handle the problem, or is that expecting too much from the Indian context? Arun sir?
I think you are being a little unfair by putting all the the onus of responsibility on the military. Military is an instrument of state policy. State policy should come from a grand strategy, which is to be conceived by statesmen. So the right place to start is at this level of the statesman who should rise above electoral politics. After all, he may be in place for 5 years, but the Prime Minister of India is forever. It's an eternal entity. So somebody has to rise above this electoral cycle, which is not only at the national level. Every state seems to generate the same kind of excitement and turmoil. So some statesmen should rise above elections and think of 25 to 50 years and say, where will India be in 2049 or 2050 when China is celebrating its status as numero uno in the world? Where does India want to be? If you take that kind of view, then you will, working backward, then you will evolve a grand strategy, then you will have a defense review, then you will ask your armed forces, look, is this achievable? And then your generals and admirals will come back to you and say, look, this grand strategy sounds fine, but to achieve your aims, we need A, B, and C wherewithal. So today we are living in a vacuum. We have no grand strategy or no stated aims, objectives, national interests. We keep mouthing slogans about muh tod jawab denge and that kind of stuff. That's very fine for the electorate, but the general should be asked, or the military should be asked, look, if we have a two-front war today, and we are talking about 2.5 front because of what? Domestic turmoil and internal problems. Some people are even speaking of 3-front war. So the generals and admirals and air marshals should be asked that if we have a 2-front war, can you fight it? If you can fight it, for how long will you sustain? Keeping in mind that we are the world's second largest importer of arms. So we are importing every nut and bolt that goes to fight a war. How long will you survive? Then will come the answer whether you can do it or not. So either you can do it, in which case it's fine. If you can't do it, then you have two options. Either you submit to China and say, all right, we will comply with your wishes. Or if you want to stand against China, then you need to get partners, friends, alliances, whatever it takes. You can't live in limbo like this. Every few weeks you have the Chinese, bearing down on you. The Pakistanis cross-border terrorism goes on, all sorts of things. So I think it's time to stand and take a good hard look at what we want, where we stand, what are we capable of.
So I want to make a couple of observations, and let me add and repeat this point that I do not want to be in any way seen as being unfair to the military. I've been in uniform myself. I'm just making this observation as a security analyst now, that we have had a national security advisor since Mr. Brijesh Mishra first assumed that office with Prime Minister Vajpayee. And from then to now, it's been almost 20 years plus. And we now have a National Security Council Secretariat. So we can only hope that what you are advocating, that the beginning of a grand strategy, which has consensus from all political parties, is something that can provide maybe the beginning of a template and take this forward. But I can't help adding two other observations, which is that in recent months, we've spoken about the inadequacies of the Indian military in terms of inventory. The first red flag was really put up by General Khanduri. You remember when he was the chairman of the committee, parliamentary committee. And from then to now, recently we had the Air Force, a candid admission that in 5 to 10 years from now, they'll come down to 19 squadrons, combat squadrons. The Navy has its own, I would say, challenges because of underfunding. So with this kind of support from the government, we spend between $40 to $45 billion annually, but clearly it's not enough. So, how do we navigate this very, very difficult national ecosystem? Arun sir?
Well, one can only hope that while the military leadership makes statements in public which are reassuring to the common citizen. After all, you don't want to alarm the country.
True.
But one hopes that in private, when they speak to the politician, our political leadership, they put their cards on the table. I was a member of the Naresh Chandra committee, and one of the major recommendations was that on the 1st of January or on any given date once a year, the three chiefs should go to the defense minister and put a piece of paper in front of him stating that out of 3,000 tanks, how many are working today? Out of our 800 fighter aircraft, how many are serviceable, how many are not working, how many ships, submarines, etc. So the defense minister and indeed the prime minister who's actually going to conduct operations in war will know exactly where we stand. And then they will take their diplomatic stands and political stands accordingly. I mean, they may say anything for public consumption, but they should know, uh, where exactly the military stands, where the country stands. But obviously that is not happening. So uh, military leadership is making public statements which reassure the public, which is good. But one only hopes that they are not deluding themselves, because if you keep repeating something hollow or false, finally you'll come to believe that you can. The Indian Army, for example, is the most experienced army in high altitude warfare. True. Our soldiers are some of the best, boldest. That's also true. But here you're facing a strong professional army with a huge economic, technological backdrop foundation. How long can bravery and gallantry hold out against such kind of superiority? So in such matters, you have to be realistic. And there's no harm in taking the worst case scenarios rather than the best case scenarios. Otherwise, you'll come to grief.
So I think this is a very, very, I would say, important observation, and what you have shared. I can only describe this as sage counsel by the Naresh Chandra committee, that every year the three chiefs should come up with the equivalent of a parade state, if I could put it that way, of their respective inventory, and apprise the defense minister, because it is true that the politician does not have that kind of time. And I have heard this many times over the last 20, 25 years that one was privy to some of these deliberations, that very often a defense minister, when apprised of a major inadequacy, would be very surprised and say, why wasn't this brought to me earlier? But I'm saying this is par for the course in the way we are structured. But allow me, sir, now to go to another area, which is towards the end of our conversation, which is now we look at the Indo-Pacific, which has been in the news for a long time, the Quad, the AUKUS, and Taiwan is now bobbing up and down. What we had experienced in Galwan in a limited way, the use of force by China, intimidation, Taiwan has been experiencing in a different way for a much longer time. But there are some correspondences. The Chinese claim that this is our territory and we will bring you back, etc. As a military man, as a 4-star plus, and someone who's looked at the political, military, and diplomatic dimensions as a strategist, what is your assessment about China, Taiwan, and will the United States, which is being seen now as somebody who would guarantee security, safety for the larger world order, is this likely to move towards, will the balloon go up, to put it more crudely? Arun, sir? I mean, I know this is asking you to stargaze, but
I have no crystal ball there. And what goes on in the mind of the Communist Party of China, is very opaque kind of organization. But it's one of the aims, I presume, by 2049, the 100-year marathon will be completed in 2049, when China expects to be world #1, etc. And I think one of their aims is also reunification of Taiwan. So between now and 2049, I presume that China would attempt to take over Taiwan, and they are progressively building up their military power. They're showing it every now and then, and they're not going to give notice. The Taiwan Strait is not very broad. China has accumulated a huge amount of maritime power. They've backed up by a coast guard, backed up by a maritime militia, plus their fishing fleet, etc. So it would be a matter of hours rather than days if they were really to mount an invasion of Taiwan. Now, whether America, the Taiwan Relations Act actually requires America to come to Taiwan's assistance, nobody knows whether they'll physically intervene, etc. So all this is shadow boxing, and everybody hopes that people will back off. But the point, I think, more relevant to us is that you hear about Taiwan and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and artificial islands being fortified. How many times do you hear the word Galwan or Arunachal Pradesh being uttered by Australians or Americans or the Japanese? So I think, again, we are participating in the Quad, but again, we need to focus ourselves very sharply and find out what is there in us, there in it for us, how is it going to alleviate our security dilemmas. So while we have an interest in what happens in Taiwan, but I think we need to look in our own backyard also.
So I think on national security, as you had once pointed out, we will be on our own. And, this is that famous line of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, Ekla Chalo. And I think we experienced it to a certain extent in 1962. And yes, we might get diplomatic support, as we did perhaps in Kargil. But at the end of the day, I think we have to look at our own capabilities and see where and how we can enhance them. And this is really, again, a last kind of strand that I want you to share your thoughts. Are we doing enough in terms of technology? Do we have a strategic comprehension of technology? And is India's techno-strategic acumen, when we are talking about cyber, space, artificial intelligence, and all the other areas, including underwater domain awareness, have we got a grip on that, or do you think we are still groping? Arun sir?
But we've come a long way since 1962 in every sense of the term. We've come a long way economically, socially, technologically, etc. We are not the same India that we were in 1962. We are a nuclear weapon state. We have modern armed forces. Technologically, we've taken giant strides, etc. So I think we need to sort ourselves out, and we need to stand up to a hegemon which is bearing down on us. Now, whether we can do it all by ourselves or not, that's the question. If we need help, we should emulate China. China used Russia to start with. In the 50s and 60s, they got military technology from Russia. Then they broke apart from Russia. They used reverse engineering, what they called Guochan Hua, huge national campaign of reverse engineering of every possible military platform. And they succeeded spectacularly. Then they latched on to America in 71 with the great rapprochement with USA. For 30 to 35 years, they sucked out every piece of technology they could from America. Either they bought it, either they stole it or copied it or bought it, because they had a vision. So what we've lacked since 62 is vision. We've had everything going for us, bright young people, brains, etc. There's been no vision that we need to stand on our own feet in the year 2021. So I think even now, it's late in the day, but even now, if we evolve a vision that we will in the year 2049, I keep repeating that year, but it has significance. In the year 2049, we will be technologically self-sufficient in so and so areas, and do something about it. And a good example is America, that America has been a friend, a partner, and natural ally, all these platitudes have been mouthed, but what have we got out of America? Not a piece of technology. All we've done is bought $26 billion worth of hardware from America. But we have not been able to acquire any technology which will make us more self-sufficient, more self-reliant. People keep saying that advanced technologies like crown jewels, no country will part with it. Sure, but there are ways of doing it. And that's what our leaders, our statesmen are all about. Our scientists, our statesmen, our diplomats. We have to collectively bargain with other countries to extract technology from them.
So I just want to add this again for the benefit of our younger audience, Gen Next in India, that when we look at the larger India-US relationship, it is true that, for instance, India's nuclear propulsion technology has come from Moscow. And what we have got from Washington and the United States are the FMS, which is a number of transport aircraft and other items of inventory. And hopefully there would be some movement on technology. But I do want to recall that one big ticket item where the United States enabled India was in the civilian nuclear agreement. That was a very major, I would say, step taken by the US under President Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when India was accorded this status. But my takeaway from this conversation, sir, is what you have pointed out, the need for vision. And going back to nuts and bolts, it is that document that you speak about, that can we actually put it down, the grand strategy document, and pick out whatever we need to as far as the military is concerned. And one can only hope that the resolve and the vision is something that would be realized very soon. And before we reach 2047 and 2049, I think we are gearing up for India at 75, which is in 2022. And China follows in 2024. And one can only hope that some of these issues would be illuminated with greater clarity than we have seen till now. But on that note, Admiral Arun Prakash, allow me to thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts on a fairly complex subject about the path ahead for India.
Thank you for having me on your program today.
Thank you for watching Security Analysis. We'll be back again next week with another program. Jai Hind.